Welcome to The Kingstonian, a podcast that profiles individuals who are passionate about what they do for a living, about what organization they belong to, or simply passionate about the community they are a part of. Hello there, and welcome. My name is Dave Cunningham. If you love all kinds of music, this episode is for you. Brian Lipsin owns and operates Brian's Record Option and has been doing so for over 40 years. The institution is a place where you can spend hours on end and with a little patience discover amazing finds you never knew you wanted in the first place. What prompted Brian to become so passionate about this business? How did he deal with the flood in his store 2 years ago? And what about the people he's met along the way? All of that in our conversation with Brian Lipsin. Brian, welcome to the program.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
During the course of the next little while, we are going to talk about a few different things, specifically the big flood that occurred 2.5 years ago. And we are going to listen to some of the stories that you've accumulated from 40 plus years behind the counter at Brian's Record Option. But let's get started with the big question. How did you get started in this business?
Well, it was in 1980. I started in the end of April. Now, before the store, I was, I guess, a professional student. I started at McGill with a BA in sociology. Now, 3/4 into the degree, I needed some time off. So I took off a year and went to Europe for $5 a day. And I came back after that year and decided, well, I'm not really into sociology. So I'm going to finish the degree. And of course, with the boomers, all of us had BAs and BSc, no jobs. So I ended up, my life before the store was get another degree somewhere in Canada, take another year off. And it was an interesting life. Then I was getting this master's in criminology at Ottawa U because my experience, it seems all my jobs out west was to do with prisons and criminology. So I figured that's what I would do. Now, meanwhile, my father owned a distributing company for independent music. And down the road, I thought, well, I had this idea of a store, but not yet. It was going to be much later in life. Mm-hmm. And then he decided to sell the place. And I wanted to take advantage of his contacts. So I had a year to go in the master's. And I thought, well, let's do the store and see what happens. If it doesn't work out, I'll go back to criminology, which I hated. And I never looked back. So I started with $2,000 in my pocket, no business degree to think of. And it was just intuition. It was a love of collecting records and music. And I developed my own reality, and I never looked back.
Did you start the business somewhere else besides Kingston, or was Kingston where you actually started?
Kingston, okay, I wasn't sure where to start. I'm from Montreal.
Right.
But I was away.
Yeah.
Oh, you too?
Yeah.
Okay.
What part of Montreal?
Well, my mother had the 3-year itch. So every 3 years we moved. So, I mean, I was born on the Carrie, I guess. And then there was a few years in TMR, Montreal West, Snowden, Côte St. Luc, and then finally the McGill ghetto area when I went to McGill.
See, me, it was Rosemount, and that was it.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
So the east end of Montreal. Okay. So I digress. Now, you had a love of music. So what kind of music were you into in those days? This would be the late 70s when you were starting to think about a store?
Yeah. I mean, it was in the back of my mind for all these years, but I didn't think it was realistic. And, well, just going back, the question I never answered was why Kingston, and I had about 7 cities in mind in Ontario, and I did a survey, and Kingston won out for various reasons, and but music-wise, it was 60s rock. It was folk. I've always been a folkie, always been into blues and bluegrass and jazz, and always ready to experiment.
So quite diverse.
Very diverse. Oh, yes.
Okay, so we're setting up the store in Kingston in 1980.
That's right.
And you're on Princess Street.
Mm-hmm.
How did you get the records to start?
Well, of course, there's your own collection. But I mean, you end up selling your own collection at a loss, because all that money that you spend on some of the collectibles and whatever, there's no way they're just going to sit there. I mean, don't forget, in 1980, records were the list price was $9.98, and you would see them for $1.99 in cheapy bins, $3.99, $4.99. So my highest price was $5. Now, at the time, I made some deals for my father for new records. I went to garage sales, the usual thing, record shows, when you're first starting out, any way you could find them.
So you would build up an inventory of how many records when you were in the early days of the store? Just ballpark.
It was quite a, I would say probably about 10,000 records.
That's a lot of records.
Yes, but right now I have over 150,000. And even after the flood, and don't forget, with the flood, I lost a third of my inventory.
Now, I'm curious to chat a little bit about the business of an independent versus a chain. Now, when we look around at shopping malls these days, you don't see too many chains of record stores anymore. You have been in business for 40 years plus. And I'm curious to know how you made that decision to go the independent route. Is it because you were looking to accumulate gems in terms of records, or different genres, or not be bound by someone else's opinion as to what you should be selling? How did that all come about?
I've always been a loner in those days. Boy, have I changed over the years. But I like to do things my way. And I don't want, like with chains, you have to give a percentage to the cheap store or whatever. You're in a mall. There's a lot of expenses you don't want to get into. I started out at cheap, and and I knew at that time I would never be a millionaire. So once you get that out of the picture, you start. I remember when I started, and I thought, okay, I started with $2,000. So what do I need? There's the rent, there's the telephone, there's, and I had a checklist.
Yeah.
And after a week or a few days, that checklist went out of the water. I didn't realize how well the money I was making, when I look back, it wasn't that much, but at the time it was way more than I thought. Mind you, now with COVID, and now running your store curbside, I'm making some of those totals, but it's still enough to, I've been spoiled rotten with, the success of the store, but.
To what do you attribute the success that you've enjoyed over the 40-year period?
Well, it's just the love of what I'm doing, and the people coming into the store see that. And I remember when I first opened, you had to walk up the stairs, and it wasn't a downstairs place. Actually, just going back to one of the stories, when I was looking for a store on Princess Street, and I find this place. Actually, it's right above Art Noise. And it used to be the AMP. And it was $300 a month, everything included. And the landlord didn't think much of me and didn't want to give me a lease. And I said, well, I need a lease. So he said, well, why don't you write out a lease and I'll sign it? So that was my first time in liens. And here I am writing my first legal document. It was 5 pages, trying to cover everything I could think of. I go back to him and he signed it. I didn't. And, but at the time when he wanted to get rid of me after a few years for renovations or whatever, I decided I could have fought it with the lease, but I thought, no, it's time to be downstairs. And so back
sense,
to, yeah. So your question on why have I done well? It's basically listening to people, listening to, like at the time, I would spend an hour or a half hour with each person coming up the stairs.
Yeah.
And there was no internet. So they would say, oh, I always wanted to get turned on to blues. So I would spend a half hour playing blues records and just getting an idea of what they're into. I mean, now it's easy because people go online and they check things out. And then if they like something, they'll buy it on vinyl. Mm-hmm. But at that time it was vinyl and 8 tracks, cassettes. I never had a cassette player until I came to Kingston, but people were bringing in cassettes and I had to check them out. So it's
so you not only sell records, you also buy records off of other folks.
Oh, of course.
Yeah,
of course.
Okay. Let's move on a little bit and move to August of 2018.
Okay.
So you come to work one day.
On a Saturday.
And what do you notice?
And, it was, there was the promenade. So I was preparing for the promenade.
The Princess Street Promenade, yeah.
That's right. And then there was a record that I wanted to bring down in the basement. That's where I kept all my doubles, triples, quadruples. Mm-hmm. And I looked down and I go, holy shit, water was going higher and higher and higher, and it was coming upstairs. And I thought maybe it was next door, the pita place, where they usually trip the sub pump. And then, I have a half an inch of water. Mm-hmm. And so I go in there and I said, Dennis, get downstairs and see what's happening. And he says, oh, in a minute. I said, Dennis, you better go downstairs. And anyways, it went to the ceiling of the basement, over the counter and out the door. And it was, if you could see it now, if you Google Brian's record option flood, and you'll see that video. Mm-hmm. And it was pretty traumatic.
So you're looking at the mess that this has created in your store.
Yeah.
And you're walking home and you're figuring, what? Is this the end of Brian's record option?
Well, at the time, it was it was insane. And someone from the WIG wanted to interview me. And I said, well, I have to go home and find my insurance agent's phone number. And I said, well, why don't you walk me home? And so she's interviewing me, and she says, so is this it? And I said, probably. It's been a good, 30 something years. And, but I don't think I could get back. I mean, I think that's the end. And so that was in the front page of the WIG and the radio. But then when I walked back, I thought, I went into the store and I went, so I've lost about a third, but 70% is still there. Mm-hmm. So that's enough. So it's not as bad as I thought. And, but then when it reached the front page of the WIG, people were, and it basically said Brian's record option is set to close. And the community said, you can't. And I was sort of stunned at the response. and there was a GoFundMe page that raised $10,000 in 3 days. There was 3 benefits in bars. People were everywhere I went. They were putting money in checks in my pocket. It was embarrassing.
How did you feel about that community reaction?
I was stunned. I was totally stunned. I know I was brought up. My mother would always say, if the only people who love you are us, no one gives a shit. And boy, if my mother was still alive today, she would have been stunned, But no, I couldn't believe it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I got all these donations and at my house and it was insane.
So you had to close the store up to clean up the mess and do some serious renovations, I gather.
Well, there was 8 months. I didn't realize it was going to be that long. Service Master came in and they very slowly took first they took the water out. Mm-hmm. Okay. Corcoran was good enough to call Service Master and all the water was taken out. And then it had to dry out. And then Service Master had to take all my records and everything to be put in storage. And then after that, I had to depend on the landlord to call his carpenter and to do something. And that was really slow. And they said it was going to be between 3 and 5 months. Mm-hmm. But you know how difficult it is to hire skilled labor. Like I figured, okay, you can just call 3 people up and take the lowest or the best.
Yeah.
And it doesn't work that way. So you just grab whoever you can, no matter how expensive it is.
Well, you're doing that during prime construction season too, right? You were looking for laborers at that particular time.
That's right. That's right.
So they're even harder to find. Yeah.
So it was a learning curve. I've never done this before. Mm-hmm. And, you know, the generosity of people were just amazing. And, you know, and I survived. Mm-hmm. And now with COVID, like it was a year of construction first. And you were sort of living in a concentration camp in a way, because it was fencing around. Mm-hmm. And totals would go down because of that. And then there was a year of flood. And now there's a year of COVID. Now, what happened with the flood, the advertising was so good that it made an imprint on people. Mm-hmm. And now with COVID, people were thinking, we're worried about me. How am I going to survive a third disaster? And mind you, they didn't have to worry about it because, you know, just the support, the continuous support of people.
And people bringing you inventory as well.
Oh, definitely. Definitely. Mm-hmm. I must have gotten maybe over 60,000 CDs donated, 45s, records. Like it was, who knew I was going to have more than what I started with? Mm-hmm. Or well, after the flood.
Now, it seems to me you've learned to do a lot of things that you've never had to do before.
Exactly.
In this whole business. I came across these stories on your Facebook page, and I gather you started writing these during the first wave of COVID, correct?
That's right.
Now, there are all kinds of little stories, and to you, the listener, get the Facebook page. Now, is it under your name or the store's name?
There's 2 Facebook pages. There's the store Facebook page, Brian's Record Option, and there's another one, Brian Lipsin. And it's interesting because the Brian Lipsin one, there's more comments.
Okay.
And people, you know, the Brian's Record Option tells me how many people have looked at it.
Yep.
And how many people, you know, have engaged.
Yep. And so the stories are on which page?
Both.
Okay. So these are stories based upon your interaction with people in your store, outside your store. And I'm going to go through a few and I'll get you to not embellish the story, but expand upon the story. And the one I liked was the one where you were talking to somebody outside your store when you were opening one day and you decided to try your Harry Belafonte.
Oh, no. That story, I never expected the amount of people who read that. Sometimes you're writing these stories and you go, anyways, yeah, that was, people were asking me whether they would pay me a lot of money to get the video of that.
So tell us how this came about. What happened?
Well, I come to work and there's this woman in front of my door. I believe she had a turban on or something covering her face. And she was cross-legged. She had a coffee and her eyes were closed. And I came up and I said, "Excuse me, I want to go into my store." And there was no reaction. And I said, "Excuse me," and no reaction. And I thought, I don't feel like phoning the police. I mean, they have better things to do. So I have to use ingenuity. Now, when I have drunks coming into the store and I'm worried about, and they're acting up and I'm worried about customers, and my way of doing it is acting stupider than they are. And usually
it works.
It works because they end up shaking their heads and leaving and going, "What's with this guy?" And so it saves the police a call, and it works out very well.
So what did you do?
Well, what I did was I decided to sing, what I do in the shower, and I yelled out, "Deo, Deo," and I thought that would, wake her up, but no reaction. And so I started with the different verses that I could remember, and I did another verse and another verse or another sentence, and it didn't work. So then I thought, okay, let's do a dance. Let's do it's sort of like Tai Chi. That's how I dance. And I closed my eyes. I looked to see if there's anyone around, and there was no one around, thank goodness. And
with a camera.
Well, maybe someone did see me, but I think the place was deserted. It was too early in the morning. And I just did a dance routine and started singing, in a loud voice. And finally, she opened her eyes and, collected her things very slowly and said I needed some help, something to that effect, and left.
Now, for those who may not know, those of a younger age, Deo is a song by Harry Belafonte from the late 50s?
Yeah, that's right.
60s, it was somewhere in that range?
Yeah. And that was I was talking about my father distributing records. And that was one of everything that he distributed, he would bring home. And I got brought up on music that way. And that record by Harry Belafonte was one of the earliest one I could remember. So it always stuck, especially in the shower.
I don't think I could get away with doing that in the shower in my house. Anyway, another story I liked was, and I think it was a mom and dad who were coming into the store to buy a record for their daughter.
Okay.
And they found the one they wanted to buy, and they wanted you to autograph it.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Remember that story?
Yes, I do. That was a Miles Davis record. And the person said that their daughter would come into the store and was very impressed with the store. And at first I didn't know who it was. They mentioned the name, and then it suddenly dawned on me who she was. And anyways, they wanted me to sign the record. And I said, well, Miles Davis should sign the record, but he's not alive. And I'm not going to sign Miles Davis's name. But, he said, well, I would really like you to do it. And I said, okay. So I started to write on the cellophane. And the guy said, no, 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 no. He opened up the record, took off the cellophane and said, right on the record, right on the cover. And I said, yeah, but now it's a used record. And like, who wants someone's name? And he was getting a bit pissed. And I thought I better do what he says. I mean, I was thinking in the back of my mind, I was thinking, what would happen if the record was defective and the person brought it back to get another one? And with my name on it, I couldn't send it back.
Right.
But I didn't tell him that. So I wrote down all the best and I signed it. I didn't sign my name. I signed it BS Option. And Stephen is my middle name and Option is my last name. And I believe the guy said, what kind of a name is Option? And I think I said I bullshitted. And I think I said something. It's a shortened version from a Ukrainian name or something.
Okay. Yeah, Lithuanian, I think is what you said.
Did I say Lithuanian? Okay.
Okay. So you told him it was of Lithuanian extraction.
Something like that. Now, the reason I said Lithuanian was my father's father. I've always thought he was from Lithuania. Mm-hmm. Mind you, it turned out it was the Ukraine.
Okay.
But that was years later.
So did he go away happy then that you had signed it?
I guess.
Okay.
I mean, he hasn't been back.
Money back.
He hasn't. No, I mean, what would you have done in that situation?
Probably the same thing.
I mean,
I'm curious as to why he'd want the store's owner to autograph the record.
I guess I didn't really, I mean, who the hell am I? I mean, it's Miles Davis, and he bought a very different Miles Davis record. It was more of a soundtrack from France. And yeah.
There are a lot of great stories that I urge everybody to go to the Facebook page and read because some of them are quite hilarious. One couple of questions I have. Have you ever had any musicians come into the store to rummage through what you have on your racks and in your bins?
All the time. Oh, yes, of course.
Any names you'd like to drop?
Oh, you mean famous names?
Yeah.
Well, okay. Well, this Tragically Hip in the early days, now their kids come in. Steve Earle was in for a few hours, which was one of my stories, actually. I mean, your usual Dan Aykroyd, the people, some of the newer bands, they come in, but I don't realize who it is until much later.
And then you ask for their autographs.
No, I'm not into autographs. No. I'm not a collector of autographs. I have a customer who's a judge or a retired judge in Barrie, and he collects autograph records and just drives me crazy. He comes in once a year and drives me crazy on finding this one and that one, and
Or he looks for albums that have been autographed by the musician.
That's right. Okay. That's right.
Okay. We are running short on time here, and I wanted to sort of wrap up by asking you to give me an idea of where does the store go from here? Like, what's the long-term plan for when you decide to retire?
I don't intend to retire unless, because I'm having too much fun. Mm-hmm. But unless, I mean, the older you get, you never know what's going to beset you, with all the difficulties, cancers and, just the everyday thing of getting old. My father and my brother opened up a store 2 years later in Toronto, and my father was in his 70s, and, now he's 94, but, if I have his longevity, I could see myself, in my 70s, 80s, running the store, slow down a bit, but still, it's just the interactions with people. And I guess the older you get, the money part isn't as important.
Mm-hmm.
And the flood sort of and COVID has demonstrated that it's, what's important is to live, not to die, and just to overcome disasters.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what I would do retired. I mean, I guess I would write more stories, but there's a lot of people on the story page want me to write a book.
Right.
And, and I say, well, you're getting it for free. Don't complain. And a book, I mean, it's a lot of work, and I'm too busy. And so, if I ever retire, I guess that's what I would do, to write a book about my 40, 50, 60 years in business. I can't visualize that. 50 years, 60 years in business. I mean, even 40 years is quite a long time.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it's the love of what you're doing.
And it's the interaction with people too that really gets the juices flowing, because I'm sure you have all kinds of different people that come in.
Oh, I do.
The same kind of customer come in all the time, it would get boring. But
that's very boring.
Given the breadth of music that you have in the store, you're attracting all sorts of different people.
That's right.
And you provide them with a service that obviously is important to them, even though, and this is a whole other topic we could probably get on, but I'm just surprised at, in these days, with the amount of people who are getting their music from listening to satellite radio or streaming services, that your store continues to provide a function in the community that you wouldn't expect it to, given all the technology.
Well, okay. In the early days, when people were first people were taping records.
Yeah.
And so that would take away, and and then I remember there was a store in Kingston that was renting records. Okay. And then, you could go online and you Napster, and you could get the whole thing on. Now, the thing with that, it's the same people who were first taping records, and you're only losing that percentage of people. The people who like records and tapes and whatever, they've always been there, and they might have deviated for a while, but they always come back.
Mm-hmm.
And I find if technology if they're stupid enough to have a technology where you just tape, you don't have to buy anything, you don't censor it, you have to live with it and adapt to it. And I find if someone gets Radiohead would put their whole album on, you can get it for free.
Mm-hmm.
But I sell a lot of Radiohead, because if people like it, they'll go and buy it on record.
Right.
Now, right now, when I first opened, when CDs took over from records, that was a problem, because most of the stores put their records in the back and just got rid of them slowly. And the thing was, I was thinking, what should I do here? And I figured all the stores were doing the same thing. A CD store, you come in, you buy the CD, and you leave.
Mm-hmm.
Very little interaction. A record store, you hang out, you talk. You don't necessarily buy the record, but my store is a browsing store. I want people to hang out. They don't necessarily have to buy things. It's not like selling cars, but you never get out alive. But
I think that's an important factor too here, is that when they come into your store and they browse and they talk to you, they're talking to someone who knows his stuff, right? And when you go to some other record stores, the people behind the counter may not be as knowledgeable about music in general as you are.
Now, the other thing is I learn a lot from customers. For instance, hip hop.
Mm-hmm.
Hip hop was never my thing. And I remember in the early days.
That's surprising.
and in the early days, people would, it was 14-year-old, 13-year-old kids who'd come in and steal the CDs. And I thought, why am I stocking this stuff if people are going to steal it and not anything else? So I stopped a section. I didn't bother. And then I noticed with posters, the hip hop posters were selling, but it was a different crowd. And I started listening to people, and I found out, like, okay, I still do this. When people special order or ask me for something, if I get two people asking for the same thing, then I stock it. Mm-hmm. And I learned a lot about hip hop, and now it's one of my best sellers.
Really?
And that happened because I was open. I wasn't, in the beginning, I was stereotyping.
Yeah.
And never do that. But because I listened to what people were looking for, and then I built up the section very gradually. And now it's probably one of the best sections in town.
Really?
Yeah. So that's, and that I never expected.
And that comes from being open.
Well, and listening to people. And that's where the talking, you want talking, and you want to hear what people are asking for. So now I've only had a computer in my store since COVID. And I've never had a computer before, and now I see what I've missed. Like Zoom.
Do we tell people what version of Windows you're using?
Well, I'm using 10, but my big computer that went belly up, because I was hearing all this negative things about Windows 10, I kept using Windows 7. And even when they said you can't use it anymore, there was a deadline, I just left it. Mm-hmm. And to my surprise, I had it for over a year, Windows 7. And finally, a few months ago, it died. There's these noise coming out of it and smoke. And I guess, okay, I'm stuck with a Windows 10.
And you don't want a fire in addition to a flood, that's for sure. Yeah. Listen, Brian, I really thank you for giving up some of your time to sit down and chat with me. I've really enjoyed the conversation, and I wish you all the best going forward.
Well, I appreciate you asking me. And, I appreciate asking me.
Theme music for the program is Stasis Oasis, a tune written and performed by Kingston musician Tim Aylesworth. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions about any of our episodes, please send a note to the Kingstonian Podcast Facebook page. This is Dave Cunningham from Kingston, Ontario. Thank you for listening. Until next time.